either through their...
Joe.
Welcome to UFO Undercover with your host, Joe Montaldo.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of UFO Undercover. Like Natasha says, I am your host, Joe Montaldo. I hope everyone's having a good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are on our beautiful blue planet. As y'all have heard me say at least 500 times now, because I've got at least that many episodes, I hope everyone's having a fantastic day, and I love doing this show for the simple fact that we cross every time zone in the world now. We can actually say we have audiences in every time zone in over 150 countries now. So, guys, I want to welcome everybody to the show because I know some of y'all are listening to us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. So, more power to y'all that are staying up listening to us. For my friends that are getting up early, or our friends having lunch over in Australia, how y'all doing, guys? I hope y'all are enjoying our show. To the person who just sent me the new pictures of Sydney, very nice. I didn't realize how much that city had grown until I saw those pictures. To all the people who won and lost on Election Day yesterday, congratulations, because I'm not getting in the middle of that. Tonight's guest is going to be Ted Pileups. Ladies and gentlemen, if you don't know who Ted Pileups is, shame on y'all to start off with. He's probably the only guy in the field that we would consider to be doing legitimate nuts and bolts UFO research on trace evidence, trace cases, and the like. I've interviewed him a few times. I know y'all have heard him on Dee's show, on Odd with Sky a few times. Really and truly, guys, I really don't know anybody in the field that does what he does. Also, on the site right now, on the UFO Undercover site, you can go find out. We have it linked straight into, David linked y'all into, let's see, it's Ted Pileups Trace, these are the ones compiled by the British researcher Paul Fuller. God, I can't speak this evening. And then there's the other ones that are the cases processing data between 2004. But anyway, you go straight to the site and link into him. Ted, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. I got tongue-tied there and for some reason trying to spit that out. Well, I had seen David had posted the link straight to it because I usually read the bio and all, but I got to say, Ted, they don't know who you are right now. We need to get out there and start slapping some people, man. Well, it's one thing if you're a newbie to the field. You've been around a little while. Most of the people should know who you are, especially the people listening to this show tonight. I know we get between 1 million and 1.5 million listeners, and most of them are involved some shape, form, or fashion, somehow or another, with the paranormal, ufology, or the likes. I'm scared to go into any more than that, but there's a lot involved in this field when it gets right off. But to start right off with you, because I know you've done just a ton of cases, and I know you've worked different types of evidence off of different cases, but somebody had wrote to me just before the show started about, have you done any cases where landings were involved? And if so, what do you think would be the most prominent piece of information you gained from that? I know we jumped right into this. I'm sorry, guys.
Yeah, well, that's about as good as it gets. Over the last 46 years, as you say, I've been in this a long time, too long, I think. And
notice I didn't say how long. I just I'm sorry. Go ahead.
In the very beginning, in 1968, my really good buddy, and I was close associate of Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who was truly the godfather of ufology. And
was he like a mentor to you getting into the field? Because I know I've read...
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I had been investigating cases since this Curl, New Mexico case in '64, and he was there the same time I was. Of course, I really didn't know who he was, and he didn't know me, but 4 years later we came together on an excellent physical trace case, 3 witnesses in daylight, and a magnificent photograph of the UFO 300 feet away. And to this day, we haven't been able to reveal the identity of the gentleman that took the picture, because he has a rather high position in state government, and would have been the last person to try to fake anything like that. And so at any rate, I learned of the case. I called Dr. Heineck at Northwestern. Lo and behold, talked to me and explained the case, and he said, "Can we get together and talk to these witnesses?" I said, "Sure." So he flew, and that's where we actually got together, and I gave him copies of cases I had investigated over the previous 4 years, and he takes them back to Chicago, and about 2 weeks later he calls and asked me if I would be able to come up. So I did. I went up and spent a couple of days up there and talked a lot with he and Bill Powers and Fred Beckman. And so at that point he asked me if I would like to join his small group of engineers, researchers, scientists investigating this stuff. And of course, what do you say? Yeah. And so then it was not very long after that, a few months, that we were having dinner in St. Louis, and he said, "You know, we have so much information coming in, so many cases, that we really need to start specializing in particular types of events." And we went through the litany of different types, and he said, before I could ever say anything, he said, "Physical trace evidence." He said, "If you would do it, I'd love for you to do it." So I, of course, said, okay. And when I gave my first presentation on the physical trace cases, I had scoured every bit of historical information and Air Force records and anything I get my hands on. And I remember I had 157 cases involving a UFO generating physical evidence. And everyone thought, man, that's amazing, 157. And today the file is at just under 4,000. And that's from 93 countries. So landings are not rare, not as rare as the average person would think. And although we're going through some really dramatic changes in the types of objects and the types of physical evidence beginning about 15 years ago. And we can get into that later if you want. To go to the point, one of the, I investigated personally to this before Marley Woods, which is a research project I'm very deeply into for the last 12 years. Before that, I had investigated over 600 cases of landing events, and probably the one that's most outstanding to me, and I'm totally impressed with Corona, Mexico. I talked to Zamora several times, and a wonderful guy, very bright and not given to flights of fancy at all. And Valençay, France, Trondheim province in France. A lot of the cases, Langenberg, Saskatchewan, I investigated 5 objects, leaving 5 separate traces, and in daylight. But you go on and on. But to go to what I think is the very best one to date, would have to be the Delphos, Kansas case. And I did a book on that case called, obviously, the Delphos landing, a few years ago. And in that particular case, very briefly, you have a 16-year-old boy who knows nothing about flying saucers, and there are good reasons that he would know nothing about flying saucers. and I wouldn't want to generate any embarrassment going into details, but he has a sheep raising project. They live out on a very isolated farm, north central Kansas. And on this particular evening, he and his family, his mother and father, arrive home after dark, and he has to go out and do the chores in the sheep pen. And this is about 250 feet behind the farmhouse. Parents are watching TV, and he's out there by himself. He has his dog, Snowball, with him, and a flashlight. And so as he's feeding the sheep, all of a sudden he hears a terrific rumbling and banging and clanking noise he described like an old dishwasher out of balance. And he steps out from behind the sheep shed, and he sees about 40 feet away an object that is, to his estimation, about 8 feet high and about 10 feet wide. And the surface of this thing is brilliant with constantly changing colors. And he said it almost looked at times like fire coming out of the sides of this thing. And the most interesting part of it was that at the base of the object, which was about 5 feet above the ground surface, there was a sort of steam coming from the base that was falling towards the ground. And this stuff was luminous, and it reached a point a foot above the surface and stopped, which is a bit curious. And as he watches this, he sees on the ground, a foot below the end that he could see of this stuff, he could see forming on the ground a sort of fog in a circular pattern. And this continues for actually an unknown period of time. And the thing suddenly brightens, and it kind of rocks on its vertical axis a couple of times, and then starts moving down through a very dense tree area, and reaches a point behind a hog shed, makes a right-angled turn, ascends, goes over the hog shed toward the south. At that point, the sound changes to a very high-pitched whistling, and the boy is totally blind, can't see a thing. And, of course, I asked him, I said, well, was it like if you have a flash go off in your face, you see spots of light? He said, no, it was absolutely black. I couldn't see anything. And interesting, too, all through this, the sheep and the dog was not moving, nor were they making any disturbed sounds. And so after some period of time, he could hear the sound of this thing receding in the distance, and he began to regain his vision, and he looked up in the south, and here was this large circular thing in the air. So he ran to the house, told his mom and dad what had happened. They ran outside, and they saw it. And later research, I found that a police officer in Minneapolis, Kansas, about 10 miles south, saw a very brilliant circular object coming over from the north, still heading south. And prior to the observation on the farm, a high school principal had seen an object flying over that town to the north, flying south, and a neighbor who lived a quarter of a mile from the farm to the west saw this brilliant object coming from the north and saw it going into the farm. So there are tons of witnesses to this thing. And so at any rate, after seeing this, he's telling them very quickly what he saw and what had happened. And they went around behind the hog shed, and believe me, it is pitch black there. And they saw on the ground where the object had been an 8-foot sort of donut of luminous soil. And the width of the ring itself, the ring proper, ranged from a foot to about 2.5 feet across. The central area, the hole in the donut, was fine, black, pitch black, no change. And so the mother and father were so curious about this, they squatted down and they both touched the soil, the glowing soil, and it felt cool and had tiny pits or craters in it. And instantly, in both Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, their fingers and hands became numb. And it frightened Mrs. Johnson to the point that she tried to wipe her hand on her slacks on the leg, and that portion of her leg became numb, even under the slacks. And that condition persisted in Mrs. Johnson about 2 weeks. She was a nurse. Her fingers were so numb that she couldn't take a patient's pulse. And in Mr. Johnson, who had, the rough farmer-type hands, the numbing only lasted about 2 to 3 days. And so anyway, the young boys said, "Mom, do we have any film in the camera?" And they had this old Polaroid camera. And they ran to the house. It had one frame left. And so they go back out into the darkness, and she sets the camera all up without a flash and takes the photograph. And it's the most beautiful image of a glowing ring within about 5 minutes of the ascent of a UFO. And I asked her, I said, was the ring glowing brightly enough that you could see how to adjust the settings on the camera? And I'll never forget it. She said, "Ted, you could have read a newspaper by that ring." And it was pretty bright. And it continued to glow for 4 evenings following the event. It was seen by, of course, all the family members, relatives, and a newspaper reporter, and enough people to establish the fact that, in fact, it glowed. And it just goes on and on. The next morning, the sheriff and the highway patrol were there, and 16 hours after the event, the dog refused to go back into the ring area and was seen by these law enforcement people running head-on into the side of a wooden barn. And so he was somewhat affected. And within 2 weeks, the dog, one of his eyes started swelling, and it was really bad. So they took him to the vet, and the vet went in through his nose, and after some x-rays, and pulled out a thing. It's about the only way I could describe it, that was alive. And it was, I would say, nearly a foot long, 10 inches at least, and it was covered with gazillion legs. And like the most gigantic millipede you could imagine. And so the dog lost the eye, but he did survive, and he lived on for several years. And the vet said, look, I don't know what this is. And they put it in a glass container and sealed it. And the last time I talked to the now grown boy was in '98, and he still had it, and it still looked as grisly as anything I've ever seen. And but also the very night following the event, as the sun was setting, Snowball the dog beat feet to the back door of the farmhouse for the first time ever. This farm dog didn't sleep in, and tore down the screen door, the wooden screen door, trying to get into the house. And he did that. They had to replace screen door 3 times. Finally gave in, let him sleep in the house. And so it's a very powerful event. A lot of odd things that went on, and the amazing thing was the ring. And when I was, Dr. Hynek got the report, through a friend who was sent a copy of the Salina, Kansas Journal from Salina to Ohio, and she, knowing Alan, sent him the clipping, and he called me instantly, and he said, "Can you get out there?" And I said, "Yeah." And unfortunately, this was 30 days after the event, and I thought, well, there's not going to be very much visible because there had been rain, snow, you name it. And the evening that I was driving out there, they had a pretty good snow. And I got out the farmhouse about 10 in the morning, and as I always do, I talked to the witnesses and got a good idea of what had gone on. And they took me out into the ring area, and the snow was all melting, and it was a bog. I mean, pure mud and standing water. And out in all this mud and water is a perfectly outlined by the snow ring. And the only place on the farm that the snow hadn't melted. And so I hunkered down there and raked the snow off the soil. And beneath the snow, the soil was a very light, totally dehydrated or dried material. And everything around it was a mud bog, including the center of the ring. And so when I started taking samples, I found that this dehydration effect went down 14 inches into the ground, which is pretty significant. Yeah. And only in the ring itself did you find this totally dried material. And I remember I melted snow in my hand, poured it onto the ring surface, and it would bead up just as though you'd poured water on a freshly waxed automobile. Pretty strange stuff.
That is really strange stuff. It's well, it's like when you were talking about the millipede. I got to thinking about. I've heard contactees talk about those, and that just kind of weirds me out. Now, and how long ago was that? I mean, time.
That was November 1st. Well, just about to the day, 1971.
Okay, who else was going on in 71? Travis was after that, right? I'm just trying to get it in time. Let's see. Betty and Barney Hill was in 61, 10 years.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then Travis was like 3 years after that. Okay. I'm just trying to get a little history in my head.
Mm-hmm.
I always like to see if there's any connection. Well, you know, because when you do this long enough, you start seeing connections in places you kind of go, well, what the hell is there a connection there for? You know, you see a pattern in something and have to stop and wonder why you see that particular pattern in something.
Absolutely.
I've been doing myself. Okay.
One, among a lot of things, working with Jacques Vallée, who is one of the greatest people on statistics and studying, finding patterns, and he really got me hooked into statistics and correlating between cases. And over several years, I found that there were just a few types of objects that actually land and generate physical traces, evidence. And in just a few years, I reached a point where I could go to a new case knowing absolutely nothing about it and have the witnesses describe the object and what it did and not say anything about the traces. And by the time I was walking out to the site, I pretty well knew what I was going to find. The things are that consistent. They're not all over the place with all kinds of weird traces and objects. A particular object generated particular traces. And I think that says a lot for what we're trying to look at.
Oh, no, I agree. I think any type of criteria that can be established ahead of time to give you a working idea or understanding of what you're seeing is absolutely fantastic because, let's be honest, it's one of the things the field is lacking in several areas. So any time that anybody's doing that, I'm just grateful to see it doing it. Because, we preach about, evidence all the time and do your own homework and pay attention to criteria, because we've been doing a lot of research. Like right now, we've got, the organization I work for has 7 major projects running all at the same time and fixing to drop in a sighting project on top of everything else they're doing. And the amount of information you can gather these days via the internet and all the people that are connected to it is phenomenal. It's just phenomenal.
Absolutely.
And now with the radio network, we can actually get the information out, assimilate it, and then get immediate response back from it. So it's a much different beast than what I got into, 25 years ago, or 28. Whatever years ago it was.
Yeah, I have wished so many times that we would have had the internet in the 60s and 70s, in the time period when we were getting, on the average, 1 landing with physical traces every 36 hours worldwide. And had we had the internet, I can only imagine. I did a lot of exchanging of data with Dr. Felix Zeigel, who was in Moscow, and he was kind of the J. Allen Hynek of the Soviet Union. You type up a letter on a typewriter, if you can imagine, and send it through the mail to Russia, and, you grow old waiting to get a response. And now look at what we've got. I just had one of the witnesses in the Marley Woods this evening call me with 2 new events there last night.
Well, that's the question somebody sent in. What's new with that case? Somebody just sent that in, too, like 10 minutes ago. I was just left it up there for later on. I was going to ask you, but now that you brought it up. So go ahead, finish what you were saying. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, I need to kind of familiarize the listeners with my original approach to UFOs was looking for real physical evidence that could give us some idea of how these things were constructed, what kind of propulsion system they might have. And it didn't even get to the point with me where I was worrying about where they were from. I was looking for an oil leak, or where some little guy had relieved himself at a site, or anything that could give us real information on what's going on. And I was a real nuts and bolts person. The data indicated, and I still believe it, that the objects were constructed devices built by something with a good deal of intelligence. And obviously, in all the reports of the little guys getting out and bumbling around, repairing the object, or picking flowers, or whatever they happen to be doing, you have to think, okay, if someone's building the device, someone might be flying it. And so I didn't get a lot in, unless I ran into it, I didn't get a lot into the humanoid events, other than when they were involved in traces. And there were cases where I saw and measured footprints, and I would run compaction tests on those footprints, and the tests indicated that the guy that left it weighed about 60 pounds, and the footprints were such that they could very easily have come from a 3.5 foot tall humanoid. And so, those things gelled, and 19% of this almost 4,000 cases involved humanoids, and nearly 100% of those were described as 3.5, 3 foot tall, thin bodies, your conventional view of the humanoids. And so, you can't throw that out, but I didn't have time to get into that because I had to concentrate on the physical evidence. Well, I now see, and especially after Marley has taught me a lot of new crazy things, but I now see that occasionally I would run into a very good landing case, good credible witnesses, and one I always think of, it was the first one I ran into involving something that I just didn't pay much attention to, the paranormal. And although I've always wanted to get into a really hell's-popping haunted house, don't take me wrong, but at any rate, this particular case up in Iowa, a lady and her 2 adult sons were living in this old 2-story house, and one morning one of the guys was walking by an upstairs bedroom window, and he thinks, whoa, and he looks out the window, and about 15 feet from the house was an object with a device with a sort of curved window, and through it, he claimed that he could see a couple of humanoids. And they were bumbling around some kind of a panel or something inside. And so he yells at Mom and brother. They run upstairs, and they see this. And they stand there looking out the window at the 2 guys, and the 2 guys were standing looking through their window at the 3 people. And this went on. This was in daylight. It went on for about 12, 13 minutes. And the object then silently moved back just a little and vertically, and it was gone. And so they ran downstairs and outside, and there had been some ice and snow, and they ran to the point where this thing had been above, and they found a circular dehydrated area where the snow and ice was gone, and the plants were just wilted and dead beyond the ice and snow. And the interesting thing is, I think back on that case, was that when they came back in the house, for the first time ever, they were seeing plates and dishes flying off of shelves and crashing into walls and the floor. And suddenly they had all kinds of poltergeist activity, or what we term poltergeist, going on in that house. And it had never happened before. And at the time, I remember thinking, well, wonder if there's a connection. But again, I couldn't get off the physical stuff and get into ghosts and goblins. And so I let that slide, and which I now greatly regret, because today, and I try to go where the data takes you, and where it has taken me in the last 5 years, 6 years, based on things I have personally observed in the Marley Woods and events that are taking place there, I now believe that not only do you have machines of mass, because we've measured that too, and they weigh generally around 14 tons. So that's not a ghost or a goblin. But I now believe there are points in time when these machines are physical, massive objects, but that they seem to have the ability to kind of not be physical and massive. And what I'm saying is, and believing, that it's time we stopped ignoring what may well be a paranormal side to this stuff. And
Garrett.
Pardon?
No, go ahead. I was going to say something, but I'm going to let you finish what you're saying first. Go ahead. Well,
the the way things are going now, the cases, I'm in a whole series of cases right now that involve things that are sometimes, to be frank, invisible to the eye. And yet they are capable of exerting physical forces on people and animals. And so I think you really have to open your brain up. I mean, you don't have to get crazy about it, but the physical stuff is still my primary interest, but you cannot shut out what is going on. So you have to look at both sides.
Well, no, I agree with you. You got to kind of look at both sides, because there was cases we've worked where apparently it looked like a paranormal. Then we found out in some of the cases, I said in all of the cases, but in some of the cases, it seemed to be maybe a gravitational drive or a magnetic drive. You know, I've been close enough to enough ships in the Gulf Coast, because there's been a couple times, like when they fly the T-3s out of Pensacola. If you're close by when they're coming by, you'll actually feel the effects of that gravitational drive. It'll actually suspend gravity where you stand, and people will start to float, stuff will start to move around them. Things will react weird to it. And the ones using the magnetic fields, anything magnetic reacts weird to them. It's a really, and then that in itself looks paranormal when it isn't. So it gets really confusing. Because then there's things that look paranormal that's not actually paranormal. It's just, you know, because of the investigator, they may have seen that something was floating. They're thinking, oh, well, you know, that might be ghosties or something. Well, no, that was a real technology. But then there are things that I would consider paranormal, which I have a much different paranormal than most people do, but that I would consider paranormal that I do see linked to sightings and especially to certain types of abductions. There does seem, I don't know if the craft yourselves, because of the types of fields they're generating, or allowing other dimensions to open up and kind of bleed through on ours, because I'm not sure what the paranormal is. You know, we can all say it's dead people and ghosts, but it may simply be other dimensions bleeding through into ours.
Exactly.
So it gets really confusing there and really sticky, and you know, it's a wicked ball of wax, to say the least. There, Ted. But I think it's really good that you've stuck as hard as you have to the trace evidence, because I really think, especially for the younger people getting in the field, you left a base for them. You know, you gave them a good starting foundation. Now, if they want to expand from it or get more into other aspects, that's fine. But, you know, one of the very first things I learned about this field, if you want to get to the truth, you got to specialize. Because there's too many researchers when I first got involved with this 30 years ago that were into 50 or 60 different things at a time, and it was too much. They were confusing their own selves about what was going on. There's a lot of good researchers in the field right now that are specialized in particular areas, and I notice the data that comes out now seems to be much better research and much more coherent. But don't get me wrong, there's still a bunch of garbage coming out. I'm not sure what. As a matter of fact, I've been talking with a group of ufologists, friends and peers of ours, and a couple of the other organizations about setting up some kind of, how can I say this for lack of a better word, some type of committee that can review a lot of the data going in and out. Because really, you know, one of the biggest complaints I get from anybody looking into this field is they have to get through so much garbage before they can ever find any truth.
That's
right. And if they don't know where to find you or us or somebody else, God knows what they're going to find ahead of time. And then a lot of them tell me the same thing. Well, they go read and all they can find is obviously garbage, so they don't bother with it anymore, and they say, well, you know, it's just all garbage. And I really think there needs to be a group of ufologists, some of the bigger names and some of the more hardcore research ones, that can say, hey, look, we're going to rubber stamp this. You know, we think this is worth your time reading, or we're not really sure about this, but something that would allow to cut back at least on some of the BS. I don't know, Ted. It's a tough one.
You're totally right. I think that is a great idea, and because as we used to say many, many years ago, it's pulling the signal from the noise. And that was the wonderful thing about specializing in the physical stuff, was that those cases, it became relatively easy through analysis to determine, okay, is this a fake? Is this a hoax? Because people would be dumb enough to pour gasoline on the ground and set fire to it and then make up a story. Well, that's easily disproven.
Yeah.
And so I was dealing with, in my mind, the most significant and most evidential cases going on. And a lot of those reports, now, when people, well, for example, let's say Bill Nye, the science guy. I love to see him on with Stanton. And this guy is touted as, he really knows the business. And I would just about bet you that he has never, ever investigated a single high-quality UFO landing case. And yet, he comes on like, well, I know everything about everything, and poo-poos the whole thing. And, I so totally disagree with that. And
well, think how nerdy he is, Ted, because you've got Stephen Hawkins and Michio Kaku out there talking about, this is a real phenomenon.
Oh, yeah.
You've got little Bill Nye, the science guy, who, has a TV show? Now he's also the expert? I mean, come on.
Oh, yeah. Now, Michio is totally a different thing. That guy I love.
Oh, I do, too.
I wish that we could get him into the serious side of UFO research.
Actually, I will tell you a little secret. I've talked to him twice. I've interviewed him once.
Oh,
he has an interest. Oh, yes. And there's an interview posted. You can listen to it. It's actually posted to the archives. He has an interest in this. Matter of fact, at the break, he asked me several interesting questions that I did not expect to come out of his mouth. I got to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
I was very taken back by it. And then when we went back live, he asked two of those questions on the air. So he does have an interest in this. And he was really wanting to know, because he knows there's a big, huge following to the field. He said, what do you think, 1 million? I said, oh, no, it's probably more like 30 or 40 million in the United States. But he really wanted to know, the nuts and bolts stuff. That's what he was looking for, something that would help him to be able to sell this to science, because the reason I brought him on the show is I wanted to use Michio to explain to the audience how we could get from planet to planet to planet and colonize the galaxy. There's not really a more credible source you can use than him. So I introduced him to the stepping stone theory on live radio, and him and I discussed it the whole show, and it worked out really fluently well. So he's got a real keen interest. We asked him to come to the X conference, but he was already booked when I was there in 2008 or 2009, whichever year it was. But he does have an interest in this. He's done a few UFO shows, and he's done a couple on TV now, and he has talked about this even on his Nova, whatever channel it's on. He's actually talked about this, before himself. So, and then you got Stephen Hawkins, who has now on 2 different occasions come out, and we've got the Vatican coming out now, and we've got some good people coming out. It's not going to get any disclosure, mind you, but it may help people like me and you get a lot more answers.
Absolutely. Every time I see Michio on Fox News or any time during an interview, I always tell the wife, if I could just have 10 minutes with this guy and let him know how much physical evidence there is, because honestly, and I'm almost embarrassed in a way, all these years, and I've always been a pretty low profile individual, and I've done quite a lot of TV and radio and so on, but I do quite a few lectures, but I have never been a self-promoter, and I've been under the radar with most people that are not really into this.
Yeah.
And I wish now that I had made myself a little more available when someone like Michio comes along and is seriously looking for solid stuff. Because a guy like that, and I'm so impressed because first and foremost, he is objective.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent way too many hours on the telephone and in person with Philip Klass, and which is useless because the guy had not an objective bone in his entire body. And so you could throw a dead alien in the guy's lap and it wouldn't change his mind.
But that's the country, Ted.
Yeah.
Me and you could go out and get an alien right now, take the saucer, fly it to D.C., land it on the White House lawn. Half of America go, well, it was just a Hollywood hoax, guys, don't you know?
No.
No matter what we told them, even if we blew the White House up, they would still be, it's a hoax, y'all. It's a hoax.
That's right.
I hate to say this, and I've said this on the air many times, and I know it drives Stephen Bissett crazy, but I really feel like the only way there's going to ever be full disclosures if E.T. does it, or we get the missing link, the piece of the puzzle that says, hey, this can only be from an alien. We do not possess this technology, or we do not have this kind of DNA on the planet. Other than that, I don't know what the hell we're going to do, but I'm not like one of these new guys who just got in the field. I'm not all bright-eyed, bushy. I know the long-term scope of this. You've been in it long enough. You know this is not something that's easily gotten to. It takes a lot of hard work and a lot of your own damn money, unfortunately.
Yeah.
My wife tells me all the time, if you would just have saved what you spent on UFO research, we could be retired. And the bad part
Amen to that.
That's the bad. I can't even argue with her because she's right. But I've learned a lot. Yeah.
What is a bit humorous is the down through the years, the skeptics are always saying, "Where's the evidence? Where's the evidence?" And we have nearly 4,000 cases involving evidence, but they ignore that. That doesn't count. And why can't you get more good images, good photographs, good physical evidence analysis, and so on? Because it takes time, it takes money, and in all those years, Alan Hynek and I, and Alan being the well-known, seriously well thought of scientist, we managed to get one $4,000 grant. And that was back in the early 70s, and we used it carefully. It got me to a lot of very excellent UFO landings. But all those years, now, do you suppose we would have gone to the moon with that kind of funding? And yet the skeptics and the disbelievers, the people that don't want to believe, will constantly beat you with, why don't you have more evidence? Why don't you have more of this, more of that? And I'll tell you what, if they went out and sat in the middle of a densely wooded area at 5 degrees above zero or less, in the chance that you're going to have something happen, and when it does happen, sometimes they're only seconds. And I had one guy, in all these years, I've only had one guy get a little cranky with me. And this young guy stood up and he said, after the presentation, and I always use a lot of images so people don't fall asleep. And he stands up and he says, where are the good, clear photos? How do you expect me to believe this? And I really was a bit angry. And I said, I couldn't care less what you believe or what you don't believe. I don't expect you to believe any of this. I'm giving you the facts as I've been able to gather them, and that's it, period. If you don't want to believe it, that's fine. But until you go out and freeze your butt off night after night in the middle of nowhere and to try to get 15 seconds, if you're lucky, a minute, of video or images of something that's moving, that's something that's in the trees, it's never a situation, or rarely, a situation where the object just sits there and poses for a good long period of time. And you're shooting in the dark, there are a lot of complications. I've been a professional photographer since I was 16 years old, and have shot just about every kind of camera known on the planet, and it's still a challenge, even with the equipment available today, to be able to get everything you would like to get.
Oh, yeah.
And it's certainly improved a lot, but it's not that easy thing like you're sitting there with a camera and a tripod waiting for sunset. Doesn't happen that way.
I gave up trying to get a clear picture of a UFO. I've been within 50 feet on more than one occasion. And because we do abduction research, we get a lot of times, we get contactees that'll call us that they'll start having these feelings that there's something going on. So a lot of times we'll stake out the area where it's almost a given you're going to see some type of craft. Problem is I know that either gravity or magnetic fields are creating, and so far I can't find any camera that gets within a quarter mile of these things that doesn't flip out. It gets distorted, it gets clear. I've actually been underneath one, the one that burnt up my wife's home. This is actually a MUFON case, fairly well investigated, helping in Gulf breeze too. I was underneath the thing. I mean, Ted, it couldn't have been, if I would have jumped up, or if I could have got on the hill and jumped up, I could have probably touched the bottom of the damn thing.
Oh, man.
And I'm just with a 35mm Starbuck camera. All I got was a white blur. That was it.
Yeah.
Like 15 pictures of just a white blur. I was so hot. And now I've gotten some pictures at distances. We've gotten some stuff in Gulf breeze. We've got some stuff out of the Stennis facility. We got a really good picture. One of our investigators got out in Blunt Island, Florida, which was an accident, to be honest with you. Nobody seen anything, but when the picture was developed, lo and behold, there it was. So, we learned a long time ago, too, because there's a lot of cases near deep water channels or near military facilities or near national parks. We'll start randomly just snapping shots when we're in areas like that. We'll just snap. And more than, I've been surprised so far how many times we've actually gotten things. And I think part of it is shutter speed is so much faster than your eye. It just catches stuff that your eye doesn't. But I don't. But then again, like I said earlier, if it's real close, it seems to always come out as a blur. It just, sometimes you can make out details, but not enough to. It makes me effing crazy. I got to be honest with you.
Believe me, I know the feeling. I have had. And I hate to keep going back to it, but the Marley Woods is the only place that I have actually been able to see something I couldn't identify in all these years. Other than the ground traces, but I mean objects. And I've had cameras. One evening we had 7 cameras set up, and they're cranking away. Well, about 8 of what we call their ambers, large amber-colored objects, appear, and they were quite close, and every camera shut down. I tried everything to make them work. Cell phones wouldn't work.
Oh, yeah.
And in a lot of cases, it'll totally drain batteries. And, of course, in all the cases where automobiles are trundling down the road, object flies and hovers above the automobile, the lights go out, the engine stops, the radio stops, everything stops, including generally a wristwatch or a clock. And if they can do that, if they have that kind of an EM field, then imagine what they're going to do to anything with batteries. And I've gone through that. Well, just recently in Marley, just before it was time to start cutting hay and alfalfa, we had a local science teacher he and his wife, very good sighting of 2 of the small light balls coming down the runway at an airport. And so he's really interested. Well, he's a pilot. And we asked him if he would come out and overfly the woods as low as he could and see if he could spot any of the circular landing sites, which we've had quite a number of. And I'm not talking about crop circles. I mean, these are actual UFO landing sites. And generally about 10 feet in diameter in the donut effect. And so he flew over. His grandson, who loves to go with him, had taken digital images, still images, to record the whole trip. And when they were flying over Marley, they come down over one location, and they find not one but three 10-foot landing sites within 600 feet of each other. They're very distinct, obviously quite new. And so the grandson shot picture after picture after picture, and they got back home, and they started going through all the pictures, and they were all magnificent photos, except each of the landing ring photos showed only a fog. And that was from, he told me he was flying over at about 400 or 500 feet. And those are the only pictures that were not clear and distinct. So, you know, it's a difficult thing to pursue. And as Jacques Vallée likes to say, it is a notoriously shy phenomenon. And that generally seems to be the case. And so I decided after things started changing in the landing trace cases, and by that very quickly I mean you're going from the classic flying saucer landing on 3 or 4 legs, multiple witnesses, a lot of times in daylight, 30 feet from the object, and you see the traces being generated by the UFO. And that's all I have in the trace catalog. There are no cases where a ring is found, no object is seen going in, and you cannot establish direct contact between a UFO and the traces. It's not in there. And yet we still have nearly 4,000. And it's just amazing that how the cases, and starting about 1995, of the old classic events started diminishing. And as they were diminishing, the cases involving what I call light balls, because I want to keep those separate in the public's mind from orbs, which generally are dust particles in front of a flash on a digital camera. So I don't call these things orbs because they're not dust specks. And so the light ball cases, ranging from baseball to beach ball size, are on the increase. And this continues, and the diminishing of the classic old saucer landing continues. And so it's a really dramatic change. The light balls also leave behind physical evidence. Dehydration generally, been a number of cases where they leave behind a white powder. And Phyllis Buttinger, a very good friend of mine who's an analytical chemist, was telling me the last time we talked, be sure and watch for the white powder because she's getting quite a lot of samples, and they are extremely interesting. And so the bead goes on. It's just a little different sort of a bead. And the cool thing is you can get pretty close to some of the light balls. I've seen them from a distance of about 40 feet. That's as close as I've been able to get.
Now, I've heard people talking about getting close to orbs, but that's a good place to stop because we got to take a break. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want everyone to please stay tuned to UFO Undercover. I am your host, Joe Montaldo. I'm sitting speaking with Ted Pileups this evening. If you got any questions, you can reach us via the new phone number, which is up on the site. It's 504-273-7379. Or you can come into the virtual auditorium on Talk, put your hand up and ask a question. Or you can, if you're on my friend list, you can instant message me on Talk, or you can reach us on Facebook or MySpace or on one of our many emails. So feel free to write in. I do see we have a couple of questions, but then there's some stuff I want to ask Ted myself and a couple other things I want to talk to him about, so you better get your questions in early because you know how I am if I get off on a rant. So, anyway, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be back in about 8 minutes. I want everyone to please stay tuned. See y'all in about 8.
You're listening to UFO Undercover with your host, Joe.
When an alien lit right there on the ground, he commenced to throw in his weight around. Now, old Six Gun didn't take too kindly to that kind of thing, especially without Vaseline or anything like that, you know. Seriously. Well, Six Gun looked that critter right in the eye and said, "Any last wish before you die, yo?" Reached for his gun, quick as a twitch, and said, "Fill your claw, you son of a bitch." Now a legend spread across the land about this pistol-waving man. But if you're from space or from Earth below, you don't give no lip to Six Gun Joe.
Welcome to UFO Undercover.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to UFO Undercover. Like Natasha says, I am your host, Joe Montaldo. I hope you all have been enjoying the show tonight. Our guest this evening is Ted Pileups. To me, the foremost in trace case evidence in this particular field. I don't really know. I had gotten a question from Sheila out of Sydney, had wrote to us and asked if I knew anybody who had done trace case evidence more than Ted did. And I have to say, no. I don't think there's anybody out here that's doing what he's. It's not that some people might not be investigating landing cases or different types of sighting cases. There are people out there doing it. It's just, if you heard Ted talking early on, you already could tell he was already getting criteria set up in the early days to give him an idea of what to expect when he hit particular cases. I mean, that's one of the very first things you have to do, guys and girls. I mean, you have to get some kind of idea in your head to what you can expect on these sites when you go out there, or else you're just spinning your wheels and not collecting real data. You know, if every time you got everything is different, then you got to kind of wonder either umpteen million aliens are visiting the planet, or you're not doing something right. But anyway, welcome back, Ted.
Thank you.
You know, I was thinking about something when we were at the break. I was getting ready to tell Ted a story at the break about some TR-3Bs me and my wife had run into one night. And this is a real short story. We were we were in a place called Fort Pike, Louisiana. It's Wrigley's Pass is what it is. It's the pass between the Gulf of Mexico and Lake Pontchartrain. It's one of the few places that you can enter into the lake and get into the suburbs of both the North Shore and the South Shore. You can sneak in that way because there's one deep water channel that cruises through there. It's a shipping channel. And in short, we were out near the NASA Stennis facility, and we had seen what appeared to be a black triangle fly over the woods and over the car where we were sitting. So we jumped in the car, we drive down the highway, we see it again crossing interstate. So we jumped across the interstate, looked on the other side, seen it as it went down the Pearl River, and then it disappeared. So we hopped on interstate, and we were driving. We'd been driving about 10 minutes and hadn't seen it. We were getting ready to give up on it, when lo and behold, if we'd seen it crossing back over interstate. So we seen it as it crossed the interstate. So I got off at a place called Pirates Harbor and ran out there looking for this thing. Still hadn't seen it. We knew it was out there somewhere. We still hadn't seen it. We got about halfway down this swamp road, and we noticed this thing off to the left, and it was tipping left to right, like its stabilizers weren't quite working. And it was angling downward as it was doing. Well, we watched this thing as it approached and hit the water in the Wrigley's Pass, but it didn't, like, wreck. You could tell it was a controlled entry. It definitely had some control to the entry. It got in, you could see the water glowing off in the distance, but then it just kind of disappeared. Well, total that night, we seen 6 of those black triangles. They were out there flying circles, I guess, looking for this thing for a while. And then when I was actually on the phone with the Louisiana State Director of MUFON at the time. I was still working for MUFON. Just tells you how long ago this was. And he was on the phone. He got all paranoid and said, well, maybe we should leave because, you know, we were getting just kind of taking pictures and had cameras and binoculars looking at these things flying around. And we were the only ones out there, by the way. There was nothing else around us for literally miles on end. So anyway, we get in the car, we're hollering, but the city, he's on the phone with me, still panicking, so I'm flying, I'm doing like 90. And we see another one come over, and this is classic close encounters, I swear. The car starts, headlights start blinking. Oh, I'm like, uh-oh. And as it does it, a white station wagon with tinted windows go by us with government plates on. Just kind of flashed his lights and went around us. So it weirded me out to see that whatever this was stopped my car, but had no effect on this other car. Only thing I can think is it was EMP shielded, because we used to do that in the Navy, shield electronics, certain electronics on board aircraft with EMP shielding. So I guess that was the damnedest thing, Ted. It was such a close encounter. Now I got to be honest with y'all, ladies and gentlemen. I don't think this was extraterrestrials. I really do think these were government craft. I can't prove it, okay? But I got to say, because of the way they were acting, the things that were going on, and the surveillance that seemed to approach us, makes me want to think some part of the government. But it was very weird, Ted. I got to tell you, man. It was like,
yeah. And
what the
I would agree with you. What I believe on the most of the objects that are triangular shaped and the boomerang jobs, I think probably there's a good chance that those are ours. And so I don't pay a lot of attention to those. I certainly would look and try to take pictures one over. But what grabs my attention is we had a case where multiple witnesses watched a huge, dark, cylindrical object fly from the eastern horizon overhead. And as it was going overhead, they could see, of course, the shape of the thing because it was blocking out stars, clear night. And underneath this, the bottom was covered with small white lights, bright white lights. And one of the people was videotaping it. And you cannot see the shape on the video, but you can see the multitude of lights. But what I really like is that after it passed overhead, it was a bit to the west, and it suddenly split into two equal pieces. One of them continued on westerly, and the other one turned and went south. And that part was observed by a family 20 miles south as it flew over their farm, and they also had seen the object split into two. Now that gets my interest going.
Oh yeah, yeah, that definitely gets you interested.
That's some really good stuff there. If only we had video of the splitting and so on. But there again, that's tough condition when you're out there at night and the object is darker than the sky, and especially when you have an individual living in who starts seeing these funny lights and goes into town, buys his first camera, which is a video camera, and for a while he gets some pretty lousy video, but it shows there are things out of the ordinary going on. It's not perfect, but it's a lot better than nothing.
It is a lot better than nothing. But see, that's the whole problem here. I mean, there's enough now. When I first got in this field 30 years ago, we'd say, okay, there's a handful of cases, but motives. And I know enough of them have to be educated enough that they realize that some of this evidence is irrefutable. Like let's use the Foo Fighters. How in daylight can you refute the Foo Fighters? I mean, you've got pilots from every Air Force that was flying at the time, Axis and Ally Air Forces, all seeing these things. These things produce maneuvers that here we are in 2010, we can't reproduce these maneuvers.
Yeah.
So you've literally got 100+ pilots from 7 different Air Forces, all in the same time frames in 2 different theaters, talking about how these things would fly rings around their fighters, how they fly rings around their ships, come and go as they wanted, stay there. They seem to be impervious to anything. And then you've had the buzzing over Washington, D.C., and, and I'm thinking, what else do you want? I mean, you've got astronauts and military pilots. I'm not sure what else they want here, Ted.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a double standard for evidence. Let's just be frank about this. Because if these same guys, if these astronauts who are heroes, and these military pilots, which a lot of them were heroes, were out there standing and saying, oh, Joe Blow just blew up the convenience store in a corner and I seen him. Well, Joe Blow's going to jail for life. But yet he says, I seen an alien aircraft, and oh, well, I think he's lost his mind. And if it was only one of them, we could say that. I've lost count of how many astronauts have come forward now. Both all come forward now. You've got test pilots that didn't even make the thing coming forward. And still everybody's kind of like, I never did understand when the pilots, when the first astronaut came out and said, I saw a UFO, why it wasn't taken more seriously. I mean, these guys were being trained to find E.T. And then all of a sudden they said they found E.T., and we're all like, you're crazy.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, what, did I miss something here? I guess if you haven't had an experience, it's really hard to accept this. Or if you haven't really done your homework, it's really hard to accept this. I don't know why, because anybody who's worth their salt as a researcher, it shouldn't take
on one occasion, and he walks in. I was sitting on the edge of the bed. I was going to take him out to O'Hare for a flight, and he was getting ready, and he walks in and he drops a letter on the bed. Doesn't say a word, describes the object. It outflew him. It outran him. He made power dives and so on. And this was not some fool up there in a Piper Cub. And then I spent a good deal of time, so many years later, with Gordon Cooper. And Gordon, not only had he had some sightings over Germany, but he had a number of events that he went after. And one thing I liked about Fox is that, and I don't own any stock in Fox, but they will pretty seriously give UFO events as they come along. And I really think a couple of their anchors would be interested in a really good event. And I've often thought if I get another super good landing with traces, that I would go to them with that and see if we couldn't get it, out to the people. I mean, I don't need any publicity myself. I've always kind of shied away from it, but this stuff should be going to the public. And my wife beats me incessantly, along with Stan Friedman, when are you going to write the damn book? And Friedman even stood up at a lecture I was doing in New Mexico, complaining about anything, about how difficult it was to write a book. And so I've always, shied away from it. And I don't really like the appearance that you're in this for money. And
that always makes it hard on you.
That always bothers me. Now, occasionally, if I need a piece of equipment very, very badly, I will go public to try to get it, because if you've got to have it for the research, you've got to find a way to get it. And right now, I'll take advantage of that. What I really need is a Generation 3 night vision unit, and because Marley is parallel with Skinwalker Ranch. And I've talked, believe me, for several hours with the top folks on the Skinwalker project. And the Generation 3 seems to be the way to get at what's going on. And by that I mean being able to see things that you're not going to see with normal night vision or the eyeball. And that's the single thing. I've got CCD cameras covering the skies and 24/7 of good equipment, but the Generation 3 is just way beyond any kind of funds that I have. And so if anyone has one they'd like to either loan or donate, I would be very much in their debt. But anyway, it's amazing what's going on, Joe. It is.
Oh, it is.
I am constantly, almost every week, I'm amazed at new things. You think, boy, I've seen it all, and you haven't. And it seems to go into a much more weird house each time. And I love it. I'm more passionate about this stuff as an old, near-dead guy than I have ever been. I love it more than I did when I was 20. And my first interview, you mentioned Foo Fighters, my first interview was with Bob Younger, who was a pilot of a night intruder bomber wing and over Germany, and the entire complement of bombers watched as this not real large, circular, brilliant object flew over the bombers, and they all rocked in the turbulence behind it, and they were astonished to see it hardly stop, reverse itself, and it flew under the bombers. And I was 10 years old when my dad introduced me to this guy. And years later, he saw me on some TV show, and he managed to get my address, and he had gone through and retrieved the names of every pilot in flight and got their statements, and he sent them to me. And that impresses me, man. That was amazing. But it really grabbed me. At that point, I wanted to know a lot more about flying saucers.
Yeah, I hear that. To the people who asked me about the website, give it time, guys. There'll be a new one up, so
yes.
Safe there, guys. I was just answering that question because I know you had asked us that before the break. And I'm going to talk with our webmaster, David, about setting up a page with a lot of Ted's recent stuff up there, so you also can go find it. Make it a little easier for everybody. Well, we keep, like the Millad pages up there and other stuff. And my favorite thing to aggravate ufology with is the Betty and Barney Hill case. Oh, God, I drive them crazy with that case, but it's worth it. It's well worth it. Just the torture to watch these ufologists squirm is worth it.
Well, Joe, I was so fortunate. My wife and I became really close friends with Betty, and spent a lot of time. We'd be doing lectures together and conferences, symposiums, and so on. And we kept in close touch right up to the end by mail. And she was a wonderful, truthful, credible lady. And a lot of people got put off as she was getting older because she was always talking about this stuff. And she would go out and watch, and she would see things. Maybe they were UFOs, maybe they weren't. But this woman was so desperate for people to believe, she and her husband, because they were telling the truth. And I firmly believe that. So then people start getting down on her because she's talking, but you have to put yourself in her place, what they went through. And Phyllis Buttinger has done some analytical analysis on the stain on the dress that he was wearing on this thing, and she's found some really interesting things that I hope she'll make public before long, because you talk about physical evidence, this stuff is weird. And so I totally agree. The Betty and Barney Hill case started it all, and there may be a lot of people jumping in as a Me Too and I'm not saying all of them by any means, but
Yeah.
they were really the first to really go public with this. And there was physical evidence with that case. And the star map, I don't know how you could challenge that. You know, and she described tests that they were doing on her that we didn't acquire until the mid-late 70s. So
yeah, she was also describing tests that were part of the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, for checking species that have been contaminated. See, my problem wasn't with the Hills that the Hills weren't abducted. I always agreed that the Hills were abducted. I just think there was more than one case here. I think there was an abduction and a military abduction, because there's three distinctive sets of memories with the Hills, not one but three. All right, you've got what they really remember, what they physically remember, what they got in there, what they returned to them in their dreams, and what they learned under hypnosis. All three of these are different, by the way. So that suggests there was more than one event. And I think what really happened here, Ted, and I really think the investigators of the day blew this, I think, because we see this in research today, there was overlap between the two cases, meaning that there was some memories covered, some memories weren't. And you had the military abduction and the alien abduction blending together, so in the Hills' minds, it was all one thing. But when you really sit and listen to what they're describing, they physically walked up the ramp, the four men stopped them on the side of the road. These are not extraterrestrial. This is terrestrial-based technologies. The physical skin scrapings, the nail scrapings, the hair removal samples. This was all stuff that Center for Disease Control was doing back in the day. If you would have been thought to have been contaminated by a disease, they were testing. Also, the paperback books, the pull-down, roll-down maps. This is definitely terrestrial technologies. These are not extraterrestrial technologies. Terrestrial, gray ship, any ship for that matter, if they're showing you something on the wall, it's not a pull-down map involved. It's just not. It's not how they do things. And a lot of the technologies they use to do experiments are much different than what the Hills were describing. So it's for me, and this is what it comes down to for me. I have, more than 12,000 abduction cases and probably about 2,000 or 3,000 military abduction cases. I look for the criteria. When you sit and listen word for word for word for word for word, it sounds more military than it does alien. So I really do think what happened was they were taken by the aliens, the government was alerted to it, and the Hills may have been, for lack of a better thing, the first military abduction case that we know of. It's a tough argument, and I understand why people get upset about it, because this is a solid case. But if you're going to do it strictly by the nuts and bolts, then you have to go back and look.
Yes.
4 guys in black outfits on the side of the road pulling you over? No, that's not alien. That's government. The whole entire time, Barney always said the same thing. Black pants, black shoes, black shirts, black duck-billed cats. That's Hill's interviews that they did in the late 60s and early 70s. Really good ones, too, by the way, Ted. If you ever want to hear them, let me know. There's some really good interviews there. And when you listen to him talk, Barney realized it. Betty hadn't actually realized it, but Barney had realized there was more than one event going on, because Barney always brought up the hotel in Canada. They checked into the hotel in Canada, but neither one of them could remember the hotel they checked into, where they were, or they didn't even have a receipt for it. So they checked in, signed, parked in, and Barney said they parked in front of the sign, by the way. They parked in front of the sign, walked into the hotel, checked in. Got up the next morning and checked out, walked across the street and had breakfast, but could not remember what hotel they stayed at or where they had breakfast. Later on in the day, they said they asked directions from one individual. They both described this individual completely different. One described him as a black man, one described him as a red-headed Irishman. There is no way, if you're both sitting in the same car looking at the same person, that you can mistake them that far apart.
Yeah.
And this is all in their own words. So when I actually sat and listened to the case, I realized there was more than one thing going on here. I had no doubt that the Hills were abducted, because there's one particular tape you listen to when Barney's being regressed. The fear that you hear, there ain't no way it's government. Not in that particular instant. That is definitely extraterrestrial. But then later
the way he talks about feeling like a bunny.
With his other tapes, when you listen to him talk, you can even hear it. He's saying it's military. I mean, he's pretty much living in their house. They were friends with people all over the military. They were the ideal candidates for something like this. and the ideal candidate for something like this. So I looked at it, and I tell her, and I've talked to Kathleen Maldron about this a few times, and I've told her, I said, I'm not saying they're not abductees. I said, I agree they were abducted. I said, I just think the actual alien abduction happened in Canada, and what they describe in the U.S. is a military abduction. I said, and I think the two memories are just bleeding through, just like in today's society, because I could give you like 50 military abductees, and if you listen to what they were saying, you would think you were listening to Betty and Barney Hill. You really would. You'd be going, oh, my God. Because they talk about being pulled over by cars, people flagging them down, being escorted to a ship or underground facility, being escorted in, being knocked out, and having things done to them. I mean, it's classic. But yet, when you hear people talk about extraterrestrials, the abductions are much different. They're picking them up, usually, especially with the Greys. One thing we learned about the Greys early on, all their technology is seamless. There's no seams inside the ships. There's no defined lines inside the ships. And even the equipment actually comes out of it. I guess it's like made from the ship itself. It actually comes out of around whatever the device is coming out of the wall. These are not the kind of technologies they were describing, and from a much different point of view than they did, we've got all these abduction cases. So if their case doesn't match any known abduction case, then only one or two things can be going on here. Actually, one or three things could be going on. One, they were just outright lying, which I don't think they were doing, so we can rule that one out from the get-go. Two, there was something entirely different that went on that, for some reason, the research is missed. Or three, the aliens and the government were actually working hand in hand at the time. And we don't know, Ted. None of us were there.
Well, that's it. But that's interesting stuff you're talking there, really.
Yeah. It is. There's enough hard data to make it a good theory, but people get so offended by it. And I'm not trying to offend anybody. I'm trying to offer a better explanation for the evidence being presented. And and even Kathleen admits to the fact, for sure, after that they had military experiences. So she doesn't really know for sure. Even she can't say for sure that the abduction, the thing that happened in Connecticut, she couldn't say for sure wasn't military. There's no way for her to know that because she'd have had to have been present. And we do know something happened in Canada by the Hill's own. I never did understand that part, Ted. No one ever wants to talk about them losing a whole. I mean, it's classic 70s, 80s abduction, a complete loss of a day. It's classic. So I never did understand why people didn't want to talk about that. It's always, let's talk about what happened in the U.S., and I'm like, wait, y'all missing a big piece of this case. But anyway, it drives me nuts. It drives him nuts. But that's good for everybody. It keeps us all on our toes.
And even in the Delphos, Kansas case I was talking about earlier, there is a long time period where to the boy, he thought, every time I would ask him, excuse me, how long did this go on? And he would say, maybe 5 minutes. And yet his parents watched a 30-minute TV show and half of another 30-minute show, 45 minutes, before he broke into the back of the house with the story. And he would never tell me. I asked him, I don't know how many times, well, did anything else go on while you were out there? And even on my first trip out there to investigate the case, I wanted to bring in Leo Sprinkle to do hypnotic regression because I believe strongly in Leo, and his boy's parents would not allow it. No, that's not good. Well, I think we really lost something there, but in 1998, so many years afterwards, and he then a grown man, he still fears for his children. And every time I would ask him, we were sitting in his home, just he and I, and having a nice, quiet discussion until he brings out the Gigantopithecus millipede. And I kept asking him, well, what happened? Tell me what happened. And so finally I got down to it. I said, look, I'm an old guy, and I'm going to drop dead, you know. And I'd kind of like to know. I put a lot of time and effort into this case, and he just looked at the floor, and he looked at the floor, and without answering the question, he asked me a question. He said, have you ever had any of your reports where balls of electricity would come out of one of these and up to the person? So he was telling me what happened. Now, not in any detail, but as I had always suspected, it was a good deal more. So you're totally correct. You've got to turn over every rock in a case. And if it's going somewhere you don't particularly like, you're not particularly comfortable with, you still got to keep going that way.
No. Well, somebody asked me just the other day, have I ever been wrong? I started laughing. And they're like, well, what's so funny about it? I said, have I ever been wrong? I said, let me tell you all this. I said, in the 30 years I've been in this field, I have changed my mind on at least a half a dozen or a dozen occasions. I said, well, I knew this was the right theory, this was the right answer. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, I got another piece of the puzzle that said, oh, guess what, Joe, you were wrong.
There you are.
And it's a hard thing to get. Now, this isn't true, ladies and gentlemen, for everybody in the field, but it is true for a lot of people in the field. Mm-hmm. Most ufologists won't admit when they make a mistake or if they're wrong. It's one of the reasons when we look at old cases, there's such a big fight, is because if there's new evidence that may change it, they don't want to let go of it. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, we all make mistakes. None of us are perfect.
Yeah.
And this is an ongoing, massive project with many pieces of the puzzle. So we're going to be wrong from time to time. And yes, we're going to have to come back and correct ourselves and say, you know what, guys, we made a boo-boo. Sorry. We know better now. Move on.
Yep. I've certainly made a lot of them. And I look back over the years, and there are a lot of things I would do differently today. And a lot of, as I said earlier, a lot of things I would look at that I would make time to look at them.
Yeah.
And but, you know, I think if you can teach an old dog new tricks, which you should be able to. I've had dogs that were pretty old, and I could teach them new tricks, and I've done it myself.
I wish I could teach mine not to try to be famous. I got a Chihuahua that thinks he should be on the air with us.
Oh.
Oh, yeah, he sees me get on the phone. He's like, oh, Dad's on the air. Let's go see. I'm like, look, you little demon. He wants to be a famous Chihuahua, I guess. I don't know. It's crazy.
Well, I always have to talk about him. I have a 150-pound Old English sheepdog, and he always, I drive race cars, the open wheel sprint cars, and probably the oldest living human in one. But anyway, the sheepdog goes with me, and if I go away from the pits for some reason, the dog gets in the car, and I don't have to worry about the car. So I get a kick out of that, and I've got a couple of great photos of him sitting in there like a person, you know. But they're pretty cool. I like them, and they're good witnesses as far as I'm concerned. I've always enjoyed the animal reaction to some of this stuff and how they react.
Because they know a lot of times in advance.
Yeah. And I mean, they can hear and they can see things that are beyond a human. Yeah. And it's fascinating. It really is.
I've seen, the dogs their ears will get up, or they'll start wiggling around, or they're like, what the blank is this? You can just tell. Yeah, and a lot of contactees will tell me that their animals, not just dogs, but all their animals, will start acting weird a lot of times before they get picked up. It's like the animal sense. It's not like the animal can do anything about it, but the animal does seem to sense it's coming. And then I've noticed over the years a lot of the contactees, which has helped me immensely, because I'll get a phone call. Joe, they're coming. I'm like, what do you mean they're coming? Oh, Joe, they're coming. I'm like, you're crazy. They ain't coming. And then, you get 3 more phone calls. They're coming. And then you'll go out there, and sure enough, a lot of times you'll run into something. But, I tell people, especially new investigators, watch what you ask for, because sometimes you may get it.
Yes.
And there's been times we've put our noses in places we know we shouldn't have, There's times that things have happened to us that I'm still probably not willing to talk about. And it's the field can be very rewarding, but it can be very dangerous as well.
That's
absolutely. I do notice now, though, I know when I first got in this field, there seemed to be a lot more harassment of ufologists going on. And I think a lot of the ones being harassed with disinformation people, because I noticed since the information has gotten cracked down on and everybody's a little bit better about information, there doesn't seem to be as much of this threats going on, or this one being told or that one being told. You know, it seems to be almost like the government's wanting this information disassembled to the general population. Mm-hmm. You know, they want to monitor what's being put out there, but they do seem that they want it out there because they're not really trying to stop it or anything. So I don't know. Now I know we're getting short on time here, but I got like 5 questions about chemtrails. Well, I mean about this one thing. They wanted to know if you thought the contrails or the chemtrails. First, they wanted to know if you thought contrails or chemtrails were real. And if you did think the chemtrails were real, do you think it had anything to do with the extraterrestrial craft? Who the hell wrote this question, by the way? What do you think, Ted?
Well, I have to be perfectly honest, and I'll be totally upfront with this. I have not paid any attention to the chemtrails things, and so I really don't know enough to express any kind of opinion one way or the other. What I've made myself do is, while I'm looking in a lot more directions, I like to keep it close enough that you can make some determinations. And so I'm sorry. I wish I could answer that, but I really...
That's always better to be honest, because I tell people all the time, you know, if you don't know an answer, just tell people, you know, because especially like our audience would rather hear somebody say they don't know an answer.
Yeah, well, I'm sure rather than make up something. But
well,
you
get so many people
surely
that'll come on. Well, you know, you get people that'll come on, and you can tell. You'll ask them a question, and then all of a sudden they start expanding on it in like 8 directions, and you're thinking, you're lying, aren't you? You know, you're going, oh, come on. And then, you know, I don't want to be rude, but, you know, when I start getting, you know, 5 million phone calls or 5 million emails about, Joe, this guy's lying. Come on, man. You can't let this go on.
Exactly, yeah.
You know, it's a tough deal, but probably in a couple of months you'll probably get a letter from us because we're really working hard in this committee thing, and my partner with my construction company is actually working on it for me, Sam. And we're going to really approach probably about 24 people, and what we want to do is they want to set up like an original board of 6 or 7 with an underboard of about 15, that when people come into the field, they can submit information. It's not going to make a difference if people put it on the internet or not. The only thing this will do is people submitting new books or new ideas, new designs can submit it into these groups, because it'll be like, you know, a bunch of big-name ufologists and people working in the field. You know, they can get a thumbs up or a thumbs down. At least that'll save some of the laymen's some research time.
Yeah.
You know, because your name had come up, and Giorgio Tucleo's name came up, Richard Dolan's name came up. Stan's did, but Stan's so damn busy. I don't even know if you can even think about Stan, because that is more than 2 people on the circuit. He's forever doing something.
Oh my gosh!
Personally, I don't even know how he does it. I just don't. He cracks.
You know, I'm always kidding him about his age. I keep saying, Stan,
oh yeah,
you're older than I am, man.
You know,
and that's bad news.
I told him last time we were talking on the air, I said, what are you, God's grandfather or something? Because, well, like when he flipped his car and still went and did his lecture at Roswell, I was amazed at the guy. You got to give him credit, man. I mean, he's out there and he's slugging away, and I agree with what a lot of what he does. I don't always agree with him, mind you, and I'll tell him I don't agree with him, which is just dangerous when you're dealing with Stan. But we get along really well. I mean, I've really done some interviews with him on his on what he used to do for a living on aircraft and nuclear aircraft and stuff, which were really, really good interviews. I've interviewed him, I don't know, 16, 17 times now. And we stay off of the Betty and Barney Hill thing because we are kind of friends, so we stay away from that. But other than that, we talk about everything. And like I said, I do agree with a lot of what he does, but a lot of it I'm like, Stan, you've lost it, bud. What are you talking about, man? And I'm like, no, dude, what is that? No, stick to what you know, dude. Leave us do this other stuff. And, boy, he gets fired up, too, Ted. It's really good he gets fired up. But he's a good personality. He's a good-hearted guy. He can take a little ribbon without getting mad. You know, he doesn't mind being heckled. He knows how to deal with it. You know, I've seen him lecture many, many, many times. He's got a commanding presence when he's on the stage. I think it's those eyebrows, but still, they're like hypnotic or something.
Oh, boy. Yeah.
I told him, I said, I know what those are, Stan. You had those things, the aliens gave you those, and they're hypnotic. And we're all like, yeah, Stan, yeah. He's a really good speaker.
He is absolutely...
to the person who asked me that, I meant to mention this at the beginning of the show. Jeff Peckman's initiative did not make it. The Denver voters voted it down, guys. Sorry to be the one to tell you all that. I seen it on the Yahoo News this morning when I was reading the political news about, you know, what all went on yesterday. The initiative didn't make it, but hey, there's always, in 2 years they can try again.
Oh, yeah.
You know, he's trying to get that ET initiative passed so they can set up that committee to, I guess, have some way to set up to meet extraterrestrials. I don't know. I'm not sure about all of that stuff. But I told him anything I could do to help him, just give me a holler. But Ted, I want to tell you thanks, man. You've been great because I know we're already done went over now. We're into Kevin Smith time now. Yes, I did. I'm tired, guys. I'm getting old and I get tired sometimes at night. I work for a living, you dog.
There you go.
You got to stay on. These are people abuse you, Ted. I mean, look, man, they'll abuse you. But yeah, we'll have to get in touch in the future because really and truly, a lot of what you do correlates with what we do. And to be honest with you, ICAR really doesn't do sightings. To make this real short, because I know we're over on time, but usually what we'll do, and now if this is a case, because we don't do lights in the sky, we quit doing it decades ago because I tell people, don't waste my time with lights in the sky. Take a picture, make a report, but that's all you can do. There's nothing you can do. But in cases where there's really good, like multiple witnesses or good video or good photographs, we will get involved in them, but we're really not set up for UFO research. We do abduction research, and we do everything that goes along with it, which is some sighting research, but, you know, and I do have degrees in advanced electronics and even in aircraft recognition from the U.S. Navy, but still, for 25 years I've been doing abduction research, you know, and that's really my forte, so I like to leave the sightings research to people like yourself, and that way I can just ask a question. You know, I don't have to spend, you know, umpteen hours trying to figure out something. Let y'all do that. Say, Ted, why the hell did the ship do this, man? And you'll either say, well, Joe, it did it like this, or, well, you know what, dude, I have not a damn clue. Go figure it out. You know, you never know what kind of answer you're going to get. But again, Ted, it was great having you on tonight. I'll when I sit down and talk with Dave and see how we can work out this site to put you a page up there, I'll let you know when it's up. I'll have Linda pop you over an email or something, or I'll drop you a phone call or something along those lines. But look, anytime you're doing something new or you got some information, give us a call. That's what the network's for. You know, that's what it was designed to do. It's the reason we set it up, so that people like ourselves had a venue to go out and, you know, it doesn't do any good to do research if you can't get it out to the general public. And
that's right.
I can't write. I have been chewed out by more ufologists than I can think of because I won't write a book. But I'm not a writer. Look,
well, there's two of us now they're after.
Oh, yeah. I was told, I'm not going to say who told me, so I will tell you this is a very big ufologist. He said, well, Joe, you're just not legitimate unless you have a book. I'm like, excuse the blank out of me. What did you do?
Yeah, no. I disagree with that.
Yeah, I got a little offended by that. I said, hey, that's
yeah.
Because I told him, I said, look, you go on tour. I said, you're going to go on tour, and you're going to talk to like 100 people at every tour you go to. I said, so you might talk to 20,000 people if you're really lucky. I said, you may do an appearance on Coast to Coast and get to talk to 2 million. I said, do you realize I'm going to talk to over 55 million people this year, and my station's going to go out to more than 300 million, and you think I'm worried about the damn book? Come on.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
I'm like, come on, man. Hey, I'm trying. Like everybody else is, I'm trying. But again, Ted, thanks for being on, man. It was a fantastic interview. It'll be posted in 10, 15 minutes. The archives get up really, really fast.
Well, thanks, Joe.
Real fast. And look, I'll be looking forward to talking to you in the future again. And I always catch you when you're on Dee's show, because she always does a good show. And Eye to the Sky. Yeah, in case y'all don't know who we're talking about, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about Dee Andrew and Eye to the Sky. That's who we're talking about. Y'all can catch her on Saturdays. She's a mean host. She's not sweet like me. I'm a sweet host. She's like, oh my God. She gets the whip out on her guest. What did you say? God dang it. Get over there in that corner and shut up till I'm ready. No, I'm just kidding.
Put that hat on over there.
Thank God she's not listening right now. I had to get into that. What the hell did he just say? Anyway, Ted, thanks again. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad everyone tuned in tonight. I hope you had a great time. Either next week or the week after, I'm going to be doing a show just about some sighting and abduction criteria, but more along the lines of what physically goes on in some of the abductions we deal with, because frankly I don't think people are quite grasping some of the stuff that's actually. I see Dee in the room. She must have heard. Gosh, you ratted me, you dog. Her husband ratted us out there, Ted. Anyway, again, thanks for being on, man. You were fantastic tonight.